Hi.
Hi.
Okay, period.
Okay.
I guess we should get started.
Yeah, I think there's supposed to be 8 of us, but she just said to start at 4 anyway, so.
Um, well, why don't we all like just start with our names and majors and stuff? That's what it.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
I mean,
no,
I,
you go first.
okay. My name's Peyton. And I'm a mass communication major and advertisement, and I'm a sophomore this year.
I can go next. I'm Maddie. I'm a junior and I'm a political science major.
I can go. I'm Claire. I'm a junior and I'm also a mass communications public relations major.
I can go. My name's Lily. I am a criminal justice and political science major, and I am a senior this year.
Oh, you don't hear me? Okay, great. My name's Jabaric. I'm a political science major, and I am a junior this year.
My name's Aeon, and I'm a senior, and my major is in Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness.
All right. Should we start with the icebreaker questions?
Yes.
I guess I can start. I'm gonna do the how did you feel while working through some of the content question. I felt kind of like overwhelmed a little bit so far because I think just political science like isn't really my favorite subject usually. And it's like also so much in the news right now. It's just everywhere. It's exhausting. And I think a theme that's also been really exhausting is like the whole like kind of like the filibuster thing or every time if something gets passed, it just, if Democrats pass
There's always
something,
roadblocks and stuff.
yeah, Republicans just knock it down. There's like, it's just so much back and forth, and I think it's just been kind of exhausting and not super fun to learn about for me personally.
Oh, I can agree with that because I thought it was just me. Like, I think it's all interesting to learn about because, politics is, there's just so much, information, but it was very overwhelming. The class was like at a very fast speed for me or a very fast pace. And I don't know, it was just a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I also felt like as a junior, especially, having all my other classes on top of like doing the prep work portfolios specifically every week
Yeah.
definitely like pushed me to my limits for sure. But I thought the content was all really interesting. I like how poli sci is one of those few majors where it's actually like one-to-one representative of the real world, So even though it can get overwhelming, like as someone who majors in this, I do think it's really valuable to try and learn about all these different uh, layers and intricacies to what we see instead of like headlines and stuff that we see on like our social media feed. I think it's really nice to take classes like this to try and like know how to digest all this information and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
like how there's sorry.
No,
Oh,
you're
no,
fine.
you're good.
I
You go.
like how there's like a variety of format with the content that we've been going through. Like at first it was like a lot of reading, but now there's also like a mix of like podcasts or videos,
Yeah.
or other things too. So that makes it like less, I guess like less overwhelming because it's not just always like read 10 pages or 10 chapters from a book.
Yeah, and the podcasts aren't even like that bad. I feel like they're pretty interesting. Some of them at least. And like a pretty easy listen.
Yeah, I was really into the DC statehood, like that unit
Hmm.
where we went through like all of that. That was really interesting to me. I would say it's like at first I think I struggled with what like the goal was with me doing it. Like I at first I kind of felt like maybe I was taking notes and those notes were being taken to be graded, but
Hmm.
my own thoughts. And I thought that that was a little bit unfair at first. But then through doing them, I actually felt like I was learning a lot more than like the standard note taking way because I had a goal when I was reading them, which I think
Right.
made it a little bit easier. But it definitely was a little overwhelming at first for me as well.
Yeah. Like less open-ended.
Yeah, I kind
Yeah.
of appreciate that sometimes.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a little easier too when she kind of like asks questions in the thing instead of just being like, oh, what did you think was important?
Yeah.
That helps.
I think for me, I like the prep work portfolios. But I think at the beginning of the semester, I was kind of like looking really into it to the point where I was like correcting my own notes because I felt like they weren't gonna align. And I would like start it early so I could give myself time to like go back and like make sure I was like hitting every single point. And I guess as like the semester has gone on, I've just let my thoughts just go on to the prep work portfolio and not like super like trying to check the rubric in every single way. So that's definitely helped me. But I also think they're a little bit frustrating because again, I feel like I have to, really look into what I'm saying. But other than that, it can be a lot, but I think it's super helpful at the end of all of it. So,
Yeah. Definitely like a really unique way of doing an asynchronous class. I feel like I've had a lot worse asynchronous classes.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is like the first asynchronous class that I've actually like learned as much as I've learned in an in-person
Hmm.
class, if that makes sense. And it's like because we have
Yeah.
that requirement to turn it in, we have that level of like accountability every week. So I really appreciate that, even though sometimes, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
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 Did everyone go?
Yeah, I believe so.
Cool. Do we want to move on to the discussion questions, or does anyone have anything else to share about the icebreaker questions? Cool. We don't have to go in order, but for the sake of like, because it's in order, do you guys just want to go in order?
Yeah.
Yeah. Might as well.
I figured the same thing. Well, I guess because I'm talking, I can just start it off. So the first question is, they say history repeats itself. Think about the evolution of voting rights. What lessons do you think we should learn from our country's history? I would say the primary thing that stood out to me time and time again was the fact that every time a new group was advocating for to get the right to vote, the argument was always, I don't think we can trust you to have the right to vote. And seeing that continue to repeat again and again and again, and as these groups all become enfranchised and gain the right to vote, you see that they were perfectly fine to be trusted to begin with, and yet we end up in this cycle of we can't trust them and they shouldn't have the right to vote. And then also at the same time, like the right to vote isn't even fully protected. So like one, we're not trusting these people to vote, and then two, we're not even giving them the right to vote entirely. So those are my beginning thoughts on that.
I really agree with that because I noticed, you're right, like it started kind of with like minorities not having the right to vote and that being a big issue, them putting like amendments in place, like the 15th Amendment, and then, then it starts with gender and then like with felons and stuff, like they're always having a way to like take away people's voting rights and for them to exercise their right to vote.
And
Yeah. It's
the
oh,
latest,
sorry.
oh,
No,
yeah,
you go.
I'm
You go
sorry.
ahead. No, you're fine. You go ahead.
This is so not organic. So I think it was like the latest or the last portfolio work that we did, the one that had like so many different Supreme Court cases in each of the chapters. I think that it's just like for history repeating itself. There has been obviously so many times in the cases that there's just like voter suppression, and that I just think that it's like the Supreme Court, they try to make a decision and like make it seem like they will advocate and protect like constitutionally everyone's rights, but then like when it comes down to it, they just side with the majority instead of the minority, and it's like really frustrating to see that that just always keeps happening.
Yeah, it sucks that because in the first unit it talked about the history of voting rights, at least briefly, and it just really goes to show how voting rights have been used as a what's the word, like cudgel against whatever minority group or whatever group demographic is um looked down upon at that time, like for example. And it also like it there's a lot of examples of politicians using voting rights as a weapon against like different minority groups to try and like pit them together. For example, like non-citizens and African Americans, especially in the like late 1800s when a lot of European immigrants came. The first um, portfolio talked about how a lot of these like new immigrants were given some sort of suffrage, but not the black men that were um, in the same areas.
Yeah,
Like
sorry.
I was just gonna say I think we're supposed to cite, but I got this from my portfolio and it says like line 255 to 258 is where I got that example from. But yeah.
I was thinking the same thing when you brought up like non-citizens. It's really interesting how the US chooses to enfranchise people when it's convenient and not like because it's like a basic human right. I think, let me see where it was in my notes. If I can't find it, you guys just move on, and if I find it, I'll bring it up again.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I was also looking at my notes back from the first prep work portfolio thing, and going back to like I have that like during the colonial era, they were making these like voting laws and rules requirements, like the wealthiest men were making it, or like property owning men. um and I think if we're talking about history repeating itself now, we have people like, I mean, at least my belief, we have people like Elon Musk, who first of all nobody even elected, and
Yeah.
he's like trying to crack down on voting laws. Yeah, I think that's just another example of history repeating itself. And I have that as lines 86 through 92 in my notes from the first prep work thing from voting rights freeholders. I don't know if anyone has anything else to add, or if
I was trying to find a citation, but I was just gonna add that uh I think a lot of like lessons that we could learn from our history of but the voting rights struggle is that it's, even if it's unpopular, it's never a bad idea to like enfranchise people, because even during the civil rights movement it was relatively unpopular to pass the voting rights bill, um, and it was seen as like a gamble on if it would like succeed or not, or if people would like you know be satisfied with it or not. And I think that taking that extra step forward to try and like help people out um, is a really good way to try and make progress.
That's
Right.
such a good point. That made me think about enfranchising like DC residents in like territories, which we learned in
Hmm.
too, where like if you look into the past, everyone was against all of these enfranchising things. And then when you look back, you're like, how did these people never, like, how did they not have the right to
Right.
vote to begin with? And we're thinking now about like enfranchising more people, and people are like, no, that's scary. Like we can't give them the right to vote. We don't trust them. But if you look back, you can see hundreds of years of reasons why we should be enfranchising people. So I totally like your point.
Right. Yeah. You said it a lot better than me.
yeah, also to the point of giving DC statehood, I think it was the first or second prep work thing, but
Yeah.
have it at one point too. So
Oh yeah,
it's,
it was like taken
yeah, it
from
was
them.
taken from them. So really, it's not even a debate of like giving it, it's more of a debate of restoring it. And I feel like that's also, I didn't know that. So I feel like that's probably something a lot of people don't even realize.
That was true with women too in the reading, which I actually also didn't know, was that they had the right to vote in certain states before and then it got taken away, which I can imagine is incredibly frustrating, like to have something and so important and to have it be taken away. So I think there's a lot of connections there, a lot of different groups that did have the right to vote and then
Yeah.
had it away. But DC is particularly a really, really scary one because they're in the US, like they're just another state.
Right. It's like what, 800,000 people? It's crazy. But
Does everyone finish their final thoughts on that question?
so at least for me.
Yeah, maybe we could also always like go back to it if
Yeah,
we
if we
had.
have extra thoughts. Yeah. Okay. Since I'm already talking, I'll introduce the second one. So, do you think descriptive or substantive representation is more important in a representative democracy? Personally, I think descriptive representation is important and has its importance, but when it comes to living in a representative democracy, though, I feel like the whole point is that you're supposed to represent the people's interests um, in whatever body of government that that the representative is headed to, like Congress or whatever. And I think that's a lot more valuable when it comes to trying to like do good things in regards to like policy or law, passing laws or whatever. Um, I think that's a lot more important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I definitely think both are obviously important. You want the people that represent you to look like you, but at the same time, if you look like me and you're not saying any of the things that I think, then
Right,
is you looking like me matter at all? I don't think so.
right.
Um, a
There's
lot of
plenty
like,
of people who look like me that say a bunch of dumb things, you
yep,
know.
yep. And so if you want to elect a white man that has all of the same ideals that I have, that's completely fine to me, because if the policies align, then that's what is actually getting done, as opposed to just like the representation of like demographics and stuff.
Right, yeah. I think substantive representation at its core is um, extremely valuable in any representative democracy.
I agree. I think that having a substantial like a very substantial representative for our democracy is more important than anything, because I feel like, they're acting on behalf of the people. So that's more important than maybe just seeing common characteristics that you might see in yourself or someone else that I just think that it boils down to how they handle business, how they represent the people and stuff like that.
I feel like also maybe, and I could be wrong, totally could be wrong, but prioritizing descriptive representation over substantive can also like, it might be sometimes where we lead to like these super PACs and like these big corporations and like people, or yeah, corporations with a lot of money. Um like in, I think it was the sixth one we talked about, the sixth prep work we talked about, um how, like laws over how much organizations and people can contribute to like election candidates. So I agree with, I think, prioritizing substantive over descriptive, because I personally don't think that, have big corporations and ultra rich and powerful companies
Right,
should.
like outside interests.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what's it called? Dark money. That's a phrase I hear.
Exactly, yeah.
I would say also like looking at, I know the prep work portfolio for this is a little bit different because we had to do like all those charts and stuff, but I would say something interesting to know, it's in step 5 where you have to say like where people are overrepresented, proportionally represented, or underrepresented. The people that are overrepresented in Congress are the people that are overrepresented in like the rest of the world, white Christian men. So it's not surprising to see that they're overrepresented there. And for the most part, I would say descriptively, like it makes up an okay like resemblance of how our actual demographic is made up in the country. So I think regardless, the focus would need to be more on substantive, especially if descriptive is already kind of met. I wouldn't say it's met as well as it should be, but you could make an argument.
So anyone have any other thoughts?
I mean, I guess I think I'd agree with everyone in saying that substantive is it's definitely probably the better like framework to take through these things, because I think while like having people that look like you is like probably a good thing, it's you'd still hope that they're like, you know, like substantively like meeting like your needs and like the things you want. And I think like this has kind of been already said, but it's like not enough just to like look like someone like you're representing. Like you should also like um be like meeting their needs and um you know, serving like the things they want. And yeah.
Yeah, like representing people's interests should be the highest priority, at least in my opinion.
I have something to add. So for me, y'all had really good points. But for the descriptive, I feel like how I look at that is like, okay, anybody can play the part. So let's say like you might think somebody really looks like, somebody who you think you're voting for the right person. It's like, are they making those points that are actually going to represent the people? Are they actually going to stand up for like what the people are saying and what they're thinking? And I think more presently, it's been kind of hard for our government to like completely gather our thoughts and like put them and make that change. So it is, I think, frustrating as both are very important. I think it's kind of like, are they listening or are they choosing a side that they think best suits them? So I just wanted to add that.
I was gonna say as well that like descriptive representation and substantive representation can sometimes go hand in hand. Like your experiences influence like how you interact with the world. So for example, like my experience as a woman would represent like my goals and my priorities if I were to hold office. So I think like that's why people may feel comfortable voting for someone that would descriptively represent them. But if you're not looking into what they actually want to do, you realize that your ideals actually don't really align at all. And if you had voted for someone that may have looked different than you might align there too. But more often than not, those tend to go hand in hand.
Good point, Madeline.
Yeah. I also think again with like when placing too much importance with descriptive, it's like some elements with descriptive are definitely more, in my opinion, should be emphasized more than others. Like I don't think someone's, religion should really be a factor at all when it comes to like candidates or um like policies. I don't think, I mean, that's the way our Constitution was originally intended, the separation of church and state. But at the end of the day, it's like Madeline, I think you said, like your experiences as woman obviously are gonna shape and define some aspects of your policies and ideas, and that's not necessarily bad either.
Yeah, it's definitely a good balance between both types of representation, especially if it's like you said earlier, like an issue that maybe specifically affects or heavily affects one group of people like over other groups of people. Um, like abortion and women representatives in Congress. That's why a lot of people maybe tend to trust female reps more than male ones because obviously, even if they might be a bit more conservative or um, pro-life, they will definitely, or at least the idea is that they will be more sympathetic to um, women's health and reproductive freedom. There we go.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I think abortion is a really good example of that.
Yeah. I try to get that out as smoothly as possible, but I kept like talking on the fly. It's harder than you think.
I also think it's like a comfort thing for some people. I think Madeline, you kind of like tipped into that point. It's like it's a
Yeah.
comfort thing, and I think the people should align with what their beliefs are and like what their goals are and what they want to see happen. And I think it's okay to step out of that comfort zone, and whether your friends are like aligning with somebody else and maybe you align outside of that. And I think you should align with the candidate that has those goals and like you see them making those changes. And like I said, it's okay to step out of that comfort zone, and it's important to not be comfortable, and it's important to do what you think is best and what the candidate is producing that you think is best. So
I was gonna add one more thing if no one has anything else before we move on. I said that representation matches pretty well. I left out women. Representation for women in Congress is atrocious. I just want to like clarify that real quick. That's pretty bad. That's pretty awful. So if no one has anything else, we're good to move on, but I wanted to add that.
All right, I can read the next question. If you had to choose a side, wait, am I reading? Yeah. If you had to choose a side, would you say that you are more concerned about passing laws that protect election integrity or more concerned about laws that prevent voter suppression? So for me, I definitely think both are important. It's like, hard to,
Mm.
but in I think prep work 5, I think it was, where it talked about a lot like states are, especially southern states, enacting laws to like strict voting laws to prevent voter suppression, but they're not showing proof of like the threat of election interference. So I think for me, I think both are important, but since they're, at least from what we've like studied so far, there seems to be more of an obvious threat of voter suppression. Like that seems to be more of a real like issue we can point to in like a bunch of different states and cases. Like the Native Americans, I forget which exact prep work, I think it was either last week or the week before, how they were um, kind of disenfranchised in a way by not being able to vote by mail because, so many of them live on reservations in Arizona. I think there's so many examples of voter suppression that we can point to and look at that, in my opinion, I'd say I'm more concerned with preventing that than protecting like election interference, prevent whatever the wording was, because I've just seen less. Not that it's not an issue, because I know we have, read some, I think, cases of where we like read about how Democrats can kind of contribute to voter or election voter fraud concerns because they're not, updating registration history and things like that. So yeah, I know that was a long-winded thing. Sorry.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think when we're talking about like voter suppression, you have the examples of voter suppression in prep work SP25, where they talk about like voter ID laws and like all of these ways to prevent voter suppression or ways to prevent election fraud that don't actually work and end up just suppressing voters. And then you look at like Prep Work 4, where we're talking about like all of these cases of voter fraud. And when you actually look into it, there wasn't actually voter fraud. So we're trying to prevent, I say we, not me, but they're trying to prevent voter fraud when at the same time there really isn't voter fraud. So clearly they're worried about maybe not the right thing. So I think for me, I would say because the data tends to support the fact that people are being oppressed by these laws, then probably we should be focusing on preventing voter suppression and not making elections more safe when they already seem to be.
Yeah, you guys highlighted the portfolio number 5, I think, the one or number 4, I think, the one about voting laws in Virginia or voter fraud. A lot of it highlighted how voter fraud really just isn't much of a wide scale issue, and it's definitely used as a sort of scapegoat for a lot of political theater in this country. Um, how most voter cases of voter fraud are accidental or just clerical errors, because a lot of voting, especially in smaller towns, are still done like by the book and maybe not as organized as some sort of file on the computer, you know, which does cause like a handful of voter fraud cases every year, but definitely not enough to hyper fixate on, election integrity. Maybe the only angle you could focus on election integrity would be like a foreign policy one, maybe talking about other countries trying to interfere in our elections, like maybe Russia or China or whatever. Um, but when it comes to domestic um, elections and like focusing on voter fraud, quote unquote, in or like widespread voter fraud, quote unquote, in the United States and not from like outside sources. I think it's definitely like wildly overblown and definitely used as a way to promote voter suppression.
I had a thought.
Because, yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead. No, you're fine. Go ahead. I talked way too long.
Well, I was just gonna add because Madeline had mentioned something about like the court cases and things like that, and I knew for one of the cases I believe is like the Brent, I don't know how to pronounce, like Brenovich versus DNC or something like that, and it was just Arizona passing certain laws about voting in the wrong precinct, and they would just totally get rid of your vote, or just being having an absentee voter, putting those type of votes in, and I feel like those type of laws really added to voter suppression, especially for minority groups. It made it harder for these type of people to get to the right precinct. They're living a little bit further out. So I just thought about that court case, and I think voter suppression is, for my opinion, I believe it. The questions, was it saying which one do I value a little bit more, or what do I think is?
Yeah, it's like if you had to pick a side, what are you
Oh,
concerned with more?
yeah, they're both important, but I say voter suppression for me.
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
also agree with you, Peyton, because I was just looking at my notes for that too, for that court case you just described. And also I think like the focus should be preventing voter suppression because like in the court case you just mentioned, Brnovich versus the DNC, like one of the key decisions that the court decided to do was that they just made Section 2 weaker and then made like part of the Voting Rights Act just like overall weaker instead of reinforcing something that would actually help the Arizona residents for voting. So yeah, that's what I just wanted to add to.
Oh, I was gonna say something that I think like really connects those ideas is the idea of pre-clearance, where in order to prevent like voter suppression, the Supreme Court was able to review like laws from different states to see if they were fair or not. And I think removing that didn't help with election integrity and also doesn't help with voter suppression. I think it actively works against both. And I think that that would be something that would need to be brought back in order to maintain election integrity and prevent voter suppression.
Yeah, just to build on what I said earlier, I think like I said, a lot of laws that are passed to protect election integrity are sort of marketed in that way, but in reality, they include a lot of technical, like minute details that uh, enhance voter suppression, like laws about ID or um, laws about where you could drop your mail-in ballot. Like I think in Texas, the governor, he used election integrity as an excuse to get rid of every um, like mailbox, like election voting mailbox in the county that Houston is in. So I think he made it so only one mailbox per county. So Houston is like 3 million people, but it's in one county. So he made it so Houston, like a blue city, only had one, place to drop off your mail-in ballot, which definitely like suppressed the vote for a lot of people, underserved people in that community, and which tend to be minorities specifically. And I think that's
Yeah.
really, yeah, I think it sucks at how it's used as a weapon like that.
Yeah, I feel like that is just another like that and the I think it was page 124 of the um Bronovich versus DNC where they talked about how after the pre-clearance law was like abolished or they got rid of it, how Arizona like started and how in Texas, like the one you just mentioned, but in Arizona too, like they immediately enacted like stricter voting and polling laws, and then like their 2016 election was just a hot mess. I remember hearing about that too at the time, because I have friends in Arizona, how it was just like the lines at the polling places were like crazy long because they basically just limited the number that they had by like a lot. So the lines were crazy long and like bathrooms became over crowded and gross and like just crazy. And I feel like those two examples are just perfect examples of like why would we get rid of pre-clearance? Like look what happened.
Literally.
And it's not like those states were like providing of evidence of voter fraud either to
Es-
support enacting those laws. So yeah.
Especially on the scale to make a law that extreme.
Yeah, because where's the integrity of the election if it takes everyone 5 hours to vote? It's just not there anymore. Now you're suppressing voters and the elections aren't running how they should be. It just doesn't make sense.
No, and it's like it makes you wonder too, like, did they really not expect that to happen? Like, or did they want those voters to, get bored of standing in line and
Yeah, they wanted to discourage people.
exactly.
Does anyone have any other thoughts on which one they're more concerned about?
I have something. So for me, both are very important. But I don't remember who mentioned it, but the voter integrity side of it, it's like way blown out of proportion. It's in the prep work, like we saw the data, it's like outrageous. It's like not really there. It's like maybe one or two times that this happened. And I feel like for me, it's like, okay, so you're claiming there's been voter fraud, right? So then you're scaring these voters because they're like, okay, I'm going to fill out this registration and then what's going to happen? Like, what if they say that I wrote down one letter wrong? So it's like, not only are you making people afraid, but you want them to go out and vote so bad. Like these candidates are like, go out and vote, cast your ballot. And then it's like, okay, now you're suppressing me because I'm scared that something's going to come up or you're going to say that I put, the wrong birthday or I was one letter off in my name. And so, like I said, both are super important, but it's like you're suppressing these voters by making these accusations, which in turn are not found true. So.
Do you guys want to take a minute to like look through the last questions and like maybe we could each like pick one that we really like to answer and then we can
Yeah,
like off of that if we just want to take like maybe 30 seconds to a minute to read through them?
Yeah.
let's do it.
I can start if everyone's read over. Is that okay? I'm gonna start with the first question. Do you favor or oppose statehood for DC and territories? I do. It's kind of ridiculous that, especially, I mean, DC needs to be fully like enfranchised, but at least they are able to vote for the president. That's something, I guess. But the fact that like Puerto Rico and other territories can't, like, those citizens can't even, like, they pay American taxes, they abide by American laws, but they can't vote for the American president is so crazy. And I visited Puerto Rico when I was in like ninth grade, and I remember meeting and talking to like an employee who grew up there, and he was just even talking about how his family for so long, like, they've been hoping and like advocating and just waiting for them to be able to have that right to vote. And like, he was like, I believe that we're gonna have statehood one day. Like, I really believe it. And it really changed my perspective, just like even like meeting the people. Like, I remember even at that time I was a lot younger, but being like, what do you mean they can't? It just doesn't make sense to me. Um, None of the arguments against it really make a lot of sense to me. I don't really agree with them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it was so interesting going through the readings and being like, what are some reasons why DC should have statehood? And they're all like facts and logic and like obviously these are reasons why they should have it. They had it before, like they're in the US. The Constitution doesn't explicitly say that Congress needs to take up all of DC. And then on the reasons why they shouldn't, it's they're trying to grab power.
The
I,
reasons, yeah, it's like, well, like they never had, or like that's
right.
the
Yeah.
way we built this country. But it's
Yeah,
like
and
we've
also it's like
already
long overdue.
established. Yeah, it's like we've already established that this country was built on like the property owners, the wealthiest people, and then we enfranchised more and more. So we're supposed to keep going. And it's also like we have already, we took Puerto Rico, we took those other territories. I don't think they probably originally mm, intended to like end up as territories. But I mean, also it's at a point where now we can't just like kick them to the curb and be like, okay, well, we release you of everything, because now they depend on like the American economy, they depend on us for so much. So we really are just giving them no options, and it's just like modern day colonialism in a way, and
Yeah.
I don't agree with
Yeah, and
denying
just to
the
add
right.
on to the DC point, I've seen a lot of pictures where people, or a lot of articles where people say that the federal district can be redrawn to like the National Mall, instead of all the residences and the residential areas of DC, so that DC, where the people live, could actually become a legit state instead of having, because that's like the one decently constitutional, I guess, argument against DC statehood is that, federal district can't be a state, but of course you could always redraw the federal district lines, which, yeah, makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
I was gonna mention that I think DC obviously should have statehood. I think, like Claire said, it's crazy, how Puerto Rico and DC itself don't have statehood yet. And I thought something that was like important to mention was I know we were like learning about like the Home Rule Act of something mentioned in the vocabulary. And I just think that it's crazy. Like there's a whole act, put in place for DC residents and stuff to be able to have like or DC itself to have like a self-governed type of situation, but they're still not granted full statehood. They're still not granted like the power of state. I just think that that's insane.
Yeah, like also like not just the people that live in DC, but like also the representatives. They talked about Delegate Norton a lot and how like she can write bills and she can be on committees, but then she can't actually vote on anything. And so it just feels like they're giving like pretend power to DC and other territories, and you're leaving them in limbo where if they were their own independent union, they could rebuild and create a structure that works for them, but you're giving them like half of the rights of like US citizens, and it just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, they're definitely pandering with like fake representation, you know.
Yeah, she's just like, I mean, she's just kind of like a puppet. Like she can't, and she tries, bless her heart, like she tries, but she just can't, and it's ridiculous. Someone wants to maybe add on or go to a different question.
I mean, that was a good point about Puerto Rico, or in like other territories being modern day colonialism because they're sort of stuck, like you said, they're sort of stuck in like this limbo between state and um, non-state, something that's not related to the U.S. because they have all these, they have to pay taxes to us, but they have no representation. And I think a referendum passed in Puerto Rico recently with their last election that people voted for statehood. I think like 54 or something percent of people said they wanted statehood and not to be a territory anymore. And it's like 3 million people on that island. So, and also like any argument against or about it being a political power grab with Puerto Rico, I definitely don't see because I feel like it would be pretty um like ideologically diverse because their current like fake representative, because they have a fake representative like um DC does, is I think a Republican, despite it being Puerto Rico. So I think that any sort of argument where people, especially like Republicans, get super scared about the idea of Puerto Rico becoming a state really
I think people
falls flat on
assume,
its face.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I
I'm done.
think people, yeah, like assume that because it's Puerto Rico, they're Puerto Ricans, they're Latinos, like they would be lean more to the liberal side of the spectrum, but also because it is an American territory, at least from like what I've seen and like which isn't a lot, I will be there. Like I'm not anywhere near like an expert or really that well versed in everything. But from what I've seen, it's like, yeah, diverse mixture of like political sides. Like it's not like just because they're Latinos, like they're gonna lean one way at all. I think because they've been in American territory for so long, um, yeah, there's a lot more diversity on the political spectrum than people might assume.
There was something else about like DC statehood. It was, I believe it's like in prep work portfolio 2, and the timestamp was like 14 minutes. But it was talking about how DC wasn't treated like a state at all when like the pandemic and everything hit. And it was like very crucial for them because they paid American taxes just like anyone else, but they didn't get as much funding as other states. And I just think it's so unfair for you to one, like not allow them to fully vote at first, and then to then treat them like they're not regular American tax-paying citizens. And when such a horrible thing like the pandemic hit, they didn't have representation in the Senate. So that I think that's really hard for them.
And especially when DC is a predominantly like black populated city, and we know like COVID did like disproportionately affect the black population too. I think that's a really like good point about during the pandemic them not being able to, they weren't given the same.
Assistance level of attention, yeah. I could do my other question unless anyone has any other thoughts. So I chose the second one, not just because it's the second one, but I thought it definitely seems pretty relevant to a lot of issues today, especially around immigration. But it says, although they are far and few between, some cities and towns have expanded voting rights to non-citizens for local elections like mayor, city council, school board, etc. In your opinion, would you support or oppose non-citizens being able to vote in local elections here in Richmond? What arguments from past struggles for voting rights do you think proponents or opponents of non-citizen voting would make? I think, especially in local elections, maybe there's a bit more wiggle room with national ones, but with local ones, I do think at least people with green cards should have some sort of ability to choose their representatives, just because if you have a green card or a permanent residency, you are on your way to citizenship, like you will become one. It's just that it'll take 5, 10 plus years. So I do think it makes sense to at least allow some sort of ability or give some sort of ability to all to millions of people in this country who have some sort of residency or like legal green card to choose their representatives, especially because local reps um, influence people's day-to-day lives a lot more heavily than sort of like national elections or president or whatever.
I totally think that falls back into the argument of like no taxation without representation. Like if you hold a green card, you have to pay income taxes. And so if they're being taxed and that money is going back into our economy, why should they not also have a say in what's going on around them? And
Yeah,
regardless, even if they aren't, even if that isn't the reason that you want to use to defend that, that's just one of many reasons how you could use to defend that. There's still people living and working in this community that are affected by the changes that people make, especially in local office. And should they not have influence on the things that are directly impacting them?
To feed off of that, I think if they're eligible to vote and they are in the United States, I think that they should be given that right. Like you said, Madeline, they're paying those income taxes. So it's like if you're paying the tax, you should be able to vote on the local level. And I think it would be interesting to see kind of the arguments for the national level as well for people that are here on a green card. You know, that would be interesting to kind of see both sides and kind of see what that would look like. But good points, both of you.
Yeah, I think the point about maybe having to have a green card is smart because when I first read the question, I was like, I don't like I can kind of
it,
see
like
myself going
gets in
both
the gray
ways.
area for sure, especially if it's like non or people
Yeah,
who are undocumented, you know. I feel like that's a pretty different argument. Like that gets into a different territory.
yeah,
Um,
I think yeah, if you're, if you're have a green card, if you're like in the process of trying to become a citizenship, if and in local elections especially, like if you have kids going to school in this country, you should be able to vote for who their school board is. And also I think it like matters especially in like maybe neighborhoods that are like no like predominantly Latin neighborhoods, predominantly Black neighborhoods, like predominantly minority neighborhoods. It could go a long way for
yeah.
them to prop up their community and their neighborhoods.
Yeah, and the idea of expanding voting to non-citizens, even in local elections, it's not even unheard of, because in the first prep work portfolio in lines 22 to 24, um, it said that non-citizens have the right to vote in at least some elections, ranging from local city elections to national elections, by over 40 U.S. states and territories since the founding of this nation. So there's definitely at least some precedent to help promote that idea.
Claire, I really liked your point about the school board, and that's such a good point. I didn't even think about that. And like you said, if their children are in the school system and they should be able to voice their thoughts and opinions on who they want representing where their children are. So that was a really good point. I just want to add that.
Does anyone have anything else to add, or should we move on?
I'm all good.
Does anyone like have a specific question they want to
I
say?
kind of want to ask this question. Well, not kind of. I want to ask oh my gosh. Yeah, it's the third question. But it talks about voting age and whether it should be lowered or other people argue that it should be raised. And it says, what are your thoughts about the two proposals and what arguments from the past do you think would be used by people arguing from we should lower or raise the voting age? Honestly, I think that the voting age at 18 right now is kind of like a happy medium for me. Like because everyone knows that like, oh, once you turn 18, like you're a full legal adult, you can make your own decisions and et cetera, et cetera. So I think there doesn't necessarily need to be like any lowering or raising. I know like 25, that's like your in psychology, that's supposed to be like your full frontal lobe is developed and like your brain is matured enough, but I don't think there should be an argument to like increase the age. But that's like my opinion on it. I don't know what you
Yeah,
guys
I would agree, especially because raising the age would mean you can vote at 25, but you could get drafted at 18. So like that's the argument that they were making back then too, with why they should lower the age, because why can you fight in a war but not vote for whether or not you would go and fight in a war? It just didn't make sense. I think one potential argument for lowering it would be there are specific like people under 18. I feel like a lot of people under 18 that work and pay taxes, although you get a lot of those taxes back if you're under the age of 18, but there are people that are working and paying taxes under the age of 18. And again, taxation without representation. So I feel like that would be the biggest argument for lowering it for me. However, like you said, I think they hit it pretty well on the head with 18.
To add to that, I feel like I'm gonna play devil's advocate here because I feel like with the generations coming up now, I feel like there's so much knowledge that these children are getting in schools, right? And I feel like while some of the knowledge is super great and some of it might not be super great, and social media plays such a big piece, I would not, I would have to see, I wouldn't be opposed to going down to 17. And I know that might be like a little crazy, but I feel like 18 is a really good happy medium. I do agree. But I feel like the knowledge that kids now have is really great. And I feel like maybe potentially 17, but again, 25 is like outrageous. I don't think that's just like Madeline said, you're able to go in at 18 years old and serve in the military. Why would you? That just doesn't make sense. So, I don't know. That's my point.
Yeah, I think 25 is definitely crazy. I think kids are definitely getting exposed to a lot more like information these days. That's like you can't even argue with that. But I don't know if I'd say that they're necessarily getting smarter. Um, because first of all, people are so bad. I think it's one of like the things I see the most is like people have no media like literacy. People can't really like they see a headline and like it becomes a fact when it's like that's not how the media works, or they see a TikTok and that becomes a fact when that's just not how it works. So kids are definitely they're getting exposed to so much, but I don't think that they're like necessarily getting better with like establishing what's real or like what's and also I think life experience does play so much into it like because the when I was 18 like that was only a couple years or a few years ago but like I I thought I knew so much, but like I, looking back, really didn't know anything, especially because, you know, you that's typically the age like you're supposed to start moving out. If you're like living under your parents' roof, especially if you're raised in one place, especially a small town your whole life, you really need like more life experience, I think, to like be able to understand so many present day issues better. Um, And so for I think for as long as society is like has the expectation that okay, you're 18, you go to college and like that's when you start becoming an adult, I think that 18 is a good age. As long as that's the expectation, you know, like if in 50 years the expectation is kids move out earlier, then maybe move out earlier, start doing things earlier, maybe that's an argument for lowering it. I really don't see, I don't like know why we would ever raise it. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I
And
think the oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say to sum that whole long thing up, I think kids
Yeah.
are like just really dumb. Like, I don't know if we should be like I think it was the 2016 election, there were like over 10,000 people who wrote in like Harambe. Um, so there's, yeah, I think just 18 is a good age because you're
Yeah,
still dumb, but like not, you're like smart enough to like where your opinion is like, okay.
I think a lot of people overestimate maybe how smart, Gen Z or was it Gen Alpha is. But I think it definitely, when it comes to the voting age, it should really focus more on representation than perceived intelligence, because a lot of adults are also dumb as hell. Just to, you know, but it it definitely should be more um focused on representation, and to like piggyback off of what was said earlier, that a lot of 18-year-olds and even 17-year-olds pay taxes and um, contribute to the economy or contribute to um, the country in some way, and it wouldn't be fair, or it wouldn't make much sense to take away their right to vote just because maybe like the question talked about Vivek Ramaswamy. Like I think he said something about raising it to 25 just for political reasons. So it seems like a lot of the arguments, at least now, are more based in partisanship than trying to achieve some sort of fair representation.
I think your point about adults being dumb is totally valid because so many, especially like older generations, they also lack media literacy. Like I wasn't trying to like blanket, be like, but I think my argument there would be like they typically, yeah, while yes, there are like some 17 and 18-year-olds who are working like, maybe more than like part-time, like basic full-time jobs pretty much. Um, it's not, that's not really the, most of them I think aren't, I would venture to say. I don't know the exact statistics. Whereas I think older adults, where what they lack in intelligence, they are like, they have the life experience that an 18-year-old, 17-year-old might not, which again doesn't necessarily make them smarter or like whatever, but it at least I think gives them a little more credibility to their um opinions, I guess, or whatever. I don't really know how to phrase that exactly, but
Yeah, I was going to make the argument that like the age of 18 is really arbitrary to begin with. But then when you started talking about how like that's kind of when you're expected to like move out and either like start to work or go to school or whatever, 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 you very quickly have to start to develop then if you haven't before. So I think that also makes sense as an age. I would say also something that I would support that wouldn't technically lower the voting age is something that they have in Virginia, which the only reason I know about it is because it happened to me. When I was 17, I was eligible to vote in the primaries. Yeah, because I was going to be 18 on election day. And I think not being able to vote in the primaries and only being able to vote in election day would have been really strange because then I wouldn't have had the choice of the candidates to begin with. So I think that could be a way to circumvent like maybe lowering the age a little bit so that people have maybe a little bit more engagement. And also people that are really civically engaged at the age of 17, those are the people that are going to go vote in the primaries before they turn 18. So you can kind of trust those people to hopefully make a more educated decision.
yeah, I think it also is important to like consider, at least a little important to consider the fact that the younger age ranges are like also the lowest voter participation, at least in the national elections. I know, I'm not positive about the others. Um, which again, that's not necessarily like a reason for not to lower it or to lower it, but I think it's a factor to consider. Like I remember because I graduated high school the year that there was an election, and I remember some of my friends who were 18 by the election, they could vote, and they just like, even now, some of my friends just don't have any interest in it, and that's really common, I think, especially when you're in high school.
I thought of a reason to lower the voting age. Something I don't know if it was a reading in this class or a reading I read outside of this class, but there was an argument made that it would be easier to register people if they were eligible to vote while they were still in high school. So you would have a higher turnout rate theoretically if you could register younger people to vote at like an actual like place where you could be like, everybody come on down and register. We're all registering today. And it's like all of these kids who are 16 and 17 in school, as opposed to like once you graduate, maybe you're eligible to vote and you just don't because you don't want to. So
To add on to that, Madeline, I think it makes it exciting. Like for the younger kids, they're like, oh, my good friend is going to vote. And not that that should be the reason, that really shouldn't. It should be the reason that you want the candidate to represent and do all the right things. But it's exciting. And it's like, okay, so these, you go into high schools and you get these students registered, and it's like this huge thing. And for some students, it's like, well, I want to do it. I don't care if my friends don't do it. I'm excited. I want to have my voice heard and I want to cast that ballot. So I feel like it is exciting. And I feel like voting is so incredibly important. And yeah, I love voting. I think it's so important. I think people should go out there, whatever age, and 18, it's like super important. And I know Claire made a point about how like the younger generation doesn't go out and vote. It's like a procrastination thing, or it's like, I don't have time. And I feel like it's so vital. It's so important. So
Madeline, I thought you actually had like a really good point about being able to vote while you're still I mean, having the option to sign up to vote and register, because in high school we were given that opportunity. Like obviously like a lot of places weren't, but I knew that it was like an optional assembly, and if you attend it, they helped you out. There was like people there explaining some stuff. So I'm gonna be honest, if that wasn't there, I probably have not registered to vote, but I was there, so I, started that process and I voted and stuff like that. So that's such a good point. Just wanted to add that.
that's so awesome. They did not do that at my school. That's really cool. And they should do that everywhere. And then, of course, if the age was lower, more people would register and then more young people would vote. That's so cool, though.
I registered because on my 18th birthday, like Snapchat gave me a notification that was like, you can register to vote or something, or you can, and so I did it then, which is kind of fun. I think we could probably fit at least one more question. We have 25 more minutes. If anyone wants to pick one.
Someone who hasn't gone, I think. I don't know if we could. I don't think she said we could do it twice.
Do we just want to keep going down the line?
is the next one about the felony?
No, that's the one after, but we can do that one.
Okay, I'm super interested to hear some points about that because I'm like very conflicted. There was something I don't remember what I think it was the prep work before, or was it? I don't remember. There was a prep work that it talked about like what was it? Some felonies, so some felons, excuse me, could vote if it wasn't murder or a sex crime. Was that the prep work before? I don't remember. But I looked at that. Madeline, go ahead. Was it the one before? I can't remember.
I can't remember, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay,
it's on the
so I
record.
remember seeing that and I like pondered on it and I was like, So it's like, okay, I can understand that, right? I can understand they're not allowed to if they, committed murder or whatever, but it's like, what about the felons? What were the crimes that the other felons committed? So I guess for me, it's like, I can't make my mind up to say yes. I can't outright say yes, and I can't outright say no. And so I guess I'm interested to see kind of some people's thoughts on that because I thought about it for a while and I was just like, I can't, there's like too many sides on both that yeah. So I'm just kind of interested to see what some people have to say.
This is like a really exciting topic for me. I'm fully in support of felon enfranchisement. I think people should be able to vote while they're in prison or jail. And my argument for that is largely because I don't know why that right would be taken away to begin with. I think committing a crime does not necessarily affect your ability to make a decision that impacts you. And furthermore, due to the way that our prison system is set up, it predominantly impacts like men of color, specifically Black men. And because of that, they're disenfranchised in a new way through the prison system. So because a predominantly minority group is getting their right to vote taken away, it's altering the way that like our election results turn out in the country. So I think that because of the way that our prison system is set up and systematic racism that's set up within our system, it makes sense that just everyone should continue to have the right to vote for me, if that makes sense.
You know, Lily, I totally agree with what you're saying that you couldn't really pick a side because I think I'm in that boat. Like I understand both sides, and I think it even in the question it says like, what does it say? It's just like, um, would they ever lose the right or not? If so, what would be the able to execute their right or to vote again? I think I saw something about it mentioning like if they completed their sentence. I feel like that's fair. I feel like, if you're in prison and during that time you're serving, maybe you're not able to vote, but if you complete your sentence, I feel like you should be able to perform in society how you once did since you're out. I don't know, that was just my opinion.
I lean toward yeah, I think it's hard to like come up with a concrete yes or no. I lean towards not allowing felons to vote just because, well, for a lot of reasons, but I know that I think there should be just at least like requirements. I don't think it necessarily should totally outright be like anyone ever convicted of a felony lose the right to vote. I think violent crimes, especially like I I think there are so many like I'm much more like we should focus, oh not that we can't focus on multiple issues at once, but I'm much more like concerned with giving voting rights to people in territories to DC to before convicted felons, not that again you can't focus on multiple issues at once. Um but yeah, and we read one, I think it was last week or the week before, that was like, I think it was last week, where the guy was arguing that like, I think it was a Florida law that it was that felons had to complete their sentence and the financial parts of their sentence, and I think that's fair. Like, I don't see really the arguments of why. I think that's part of their sentence. Like I've seen so many experiences been the victim of a violent crime to where someone has to pay restitution. It's not usually like these people are, there are lawyer fees and court fees, but a lot of time it's those fees that they're talking about, it's restitution fees to the victim of the crime that they committed. And I think, if they're not even fully paying back the victim that they hurt or did whatever to, it shouldn't even be really an argument of, that's just my opinion. I know it's like it is hard to like come to a concrete answer because I know it does disproportionately affect people of color, and I don't have all the answers to because I also don't it's a really complex problem. I think all of these issues that we've talked about are um so I feel like I don't understand every bit and crevice, but like that's why I think I lean towards no, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a really really layered, multifaceted issue. I think at least something that we should focus on right now is definitely the fact that a lot of, um, especially state crimes, that we wouldn't really consider like morally abhorrent, well, obviously maybe immoral in general, like fighting or stealing, but not burglary, not like violent burglary. A lot of those are considered felonies. So people, get arrested for something that definitely shouldn't be serious enough to take away their right to vote, forever. But that's what happens. So I think that's definitely a reform that should be focused on at first. And then maybe we can start talking about, convicted violent criminals or people in more serious categories who are out in society after like 20, 30 years. Although I do definitely lean towards maybe extending voting rights to them, maybe after they pay the restitution or whatever, for example. Because like Madeline said earlier, them, you know, committing the act to vote isn't really gonna hurt or endanger anyone in their lives or themselves or whatever. So it doesn't really, you know, there's not gonna be like a referendum on making murder illegal or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
um, I do think maybe the focus, although how do I say this? The focus on people's past crimes maybe are being too fixated on in regards to the argument of if they should be able to vote after they get out, you know? I think they're a bit more different than um a lot of people make it out to be or should be, not considered in the same category. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I would say also it's interesting that like, because again, I support it while they're in prison, but also after, and I think that's something we're more able to agree upon. I feel like if you've gone through the process and they've said, this is your sentence, you've served your sentence, why are you still being punished after the fact? And also, I know that like felons are different from other groups that we've discussed in their process of getting the right to vote. But again, regardless of the crimes they've commit, they're owed a certain amount of trust to vote. And to say that we don't trust them to vote because of whatever reason, it's kind of follows that same precedent. Again, different groups of people, but still worrying. Especially because I feel a lot of the reasons to ensure that felons don't have the right to vote after are also rooted in racism because Black people are predominantly arrested and jailed. So it's a good way to keep people suppressed that a lot of people don't consider.
Yeah. I think my only argument to, I think what Barrick said about, like them having, like them while they're incarcerated or whatever, voting before their sentence is up, voting on how their sentence would impact like who their like their ability to vote or whatever. I think my argument there is like I don't know if I think someone in jail and for a long time, so you're going to be in jail for a long time, should necessarily, or even who's, doesn't matter, I guess, how long you're good. If you're a convicted felon and serving your sentence, I don't know if I think you should necessarily be able to vote on like the district attorney, who's the person in charge of prosecuting these, because you have liberal district attorneys and conservative district attorneys, and those district attorneys, they're the people who prosecute the crimes. It makes a huge difference, not just for the felons, but for the criminals, or not just for the felons, but for the victims. Um, because I feel like that's also a conversation that like, or a part of the conversation that gets left out when it's like, oh, why are they still being punished after they've served their time? Not that I agree or think it's, not that I'm saying this is how it is for everyone, but a lot of victims of crimes, no matter how long that the person's sentence is, what they did to them, no matter how long that sentence is, a lot of times it's, that victim has to deal with years and years and a lifetime, a lot of the time, of trauma, of fear, of punishment for something that they didn't even do. So I think I could see that being an argument of, okay, well, even if I've gotten out, why do I still have to pay my restitution or do all this before I can maybe be eligible for registration?
I do want to go back to this because I know at the beginning we talked about how some voters had the right to vote, like women had the right to vote, and then it was taken from them. And that I've looked at, like, listened to y'all and all the different sides. Um, it's like they get arrested and they go into prison and then they're now, charged with a felony. They've now had that right to vote taken from them. I know this like might not like spark an conversation, but it's like I could see how frustrating that could be for somebody, And Claire, I do like really agree with you. And I think that is so true. And it's like, but can you imagine like you're arrested and yes, you did commit the crime. Yes, you were found guilty, but it's like you got charged and then it's like, oh, you can't vote anymore. So it's like super, I'm sure for them, very frustrating. But I just wanted to add that because it was
Yeah,
on
no,
there.
for sure. And that's why I feel like I can't really necessarily be like, no, we should never enfranchise convicted felons. And that's why I think I also like would place the priority of like, I'm not as concerned, especially when it comes to violent crimes like murder, like sexual assault, like stalking, like whatever, like, you know, if it's not that it's okay, but something like, I don't know, like business fraud or something, because there are so many felonies that it's like, why is that, you know, why are we taking
Yeah,
away the
it's
right
like
to vote?
grouped all together. Yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely, it's not like I think we should blanket all convicted felons, but at the same time, I don't think that I'm like every convicted felon deserves a right to vote at all.
It's also tricky because like voting and being imprisoned don't really have anything to do with one another. It seems like an arbitrary punishment for going to jail. Your argument about like a defense attorney totally makes sense, but I think also any of us have interests that allow us to vote in a specific way. So I think taking it away because they may have an interest in one area or another wouldn't be a specifically fair reason to do that. But I respect your argument also, and I don't ever really get to talk to people that have different perspectives on this because you know how we end up in like our little echo chambers. And so hearing these arguments is very like it's giving me a lot to think about. So I really appreciate it. So I don't want you to think that I'm like combative. I really appreciate everything
No,
you've said.
I get it. And I do say I think I would have a completely different perspective if I hadn't ever been like
Totally.
a victim,
Perspectives
like
influence like how you
yeah,
act.
like
Yeah.
I think I would have a completely different perspective. So, and I guess that goes back into like the descriptive versus substantial thing we talked about earlier. But yeah, and at the end of the day, I think we agree on like the base issues, like the root issues. Like we both agree that the systemic, you know, racism is an undeniable like factor that we need to like needs to be addressed. Yeah, and I think it's just like little specific like things where
Yeah. It's like a web of different issues that like interlap.
yeah,
So this is just like one little option, I think.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But oh my God, 10 minutes. Does anyone
So
else
happy
have
that
any?
question spurred debate. I thought we were just going to agree the whole time. So that was really fun.
Yeah.
No, and I appreciate everybody's because I'm like super, it's like, it's just tough because it's like, I could not imagine, having my ability or I guess my right to vote because it is a right. Everybody is given that right. And but Claire, I definitely agree with you. Like, somebody that commits a crime that is like, I mean, just unreal. Like,
And
not again, Madeline, you also made a very solid point that is nothing. Voting is, and it's so difficult because everybody made such good points. But it's like, what does that have to do with voting? But it's also like, Claire, you made a point about how something about you couldn't vote for like the district or something. That makes sense because it's like, okay, this guy, screwed me over, so I'm going to go ahead and go against him. And so everybody made such great points. So I really am appreciative of that.
Yeah, I'm glad we all acknowledge how multifaceted a lot of these issues are and how it's never black and white and it's more gray than anything.
yeah, especially with the convicted felon issue, I think it's like
Yeah.
so
It
much
can get
harder.
pretty personal,
It's so
you
much harder
know.
than coming to an agreement too on because there's like so many different types of, there's like a person who's been convicted of one or two felonies that weren't violent 30 years ago and has done amazing. Like, isn't that person has actually proved that they've changed? And then there are those criminals who have been in and out of jail like every other year, just consistently.
Hmm.
Like people do like there's like every felon is different. So
Yeah.
it's
It's
hard
like
because
different. Yeah.
yeah, and because it's you also can't just like pick and choose necessarily like case by case who you want to give um who you want to disenfranchise or not. But yes, like I think that's why it's like okay, maybe basic like limitations or basic you know, like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the answers. I'm not a politician. I don't want to be a politician, so I don't really like feel like I need to have the answers. But
Yeah,
yeah,
different considerations for different types of felonies, definitely. Like I said earlier, is definitely something that should be at least focused on right now, despite anyone's disagreements with expanding it to every felon, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, it's so difficult to like what crimes then, like what amount of time, like how do you decide? And I think I really like that exact thing has drawn us to different conclusions, because I see that and I say, if we can't set a bar or we struggle to set a bar, then let's not set a bar. Whereas you could keep looking and seeing like, how could we set a bar? And maybe you could, but when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I would have no idea how to do that. So it would just make more sense to me to not. But again, there are many crimes that are way, way worse than other crimes. And then being weighted the same in regards to having your right to vote taken away is a little bit crazy.
yeah. I think when I like refer to violent crimes, I definitely mostly mean ones that like give another person who had nothing to do with, anything, like a, a long period of trauma, like pretty much, or it's gonna threaten their physical safety. I think it is hard to pick and choose, but there are certain like kind of jumping off points we can like go off, and I don't think it's impossible to necessarily come up with like a solution that enfranchises convicted felons who like, aren't actively like going in and out of jail, who aren't actively like making the victims that they in their case, feel unsafe, yeah.
That's totally a good point. There's definitely a jumping off point, and there's a difference between those crimes and crimes like you were like possessing like weed. You should not get your right to vote taken away for that. That's so dumb. But if you killed 30 people, that's not so great. That's
Yeah.
just not so great. So I see your point. I see your point. You're bringing me around a little. You're bringing me around.
And I think, yeah, too, there are also like criminals who, they go through the justice system. It's, no one goes through it like perfectly, and there's no perfect way to go through it, but they are able to demonstrate, that they've changed by like if they're staying out of trouble, and then there are criminals who aren't, especially in violent cases, where I'm like, why would, so yeah, we could just go round and round talking about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone have anything else for the last 4 minutes?
Well, okay. I mean, I guess I'll choose the second to last question, maybe to briefly talk about it. It's about money and politics. In my opinion on it, I think it's difficult because realistically, for any sort of campaign, you do need some sort of fundraising. It's never going to be cheap to run a presidential campaign in one of the biggest countries in the world. I think it's like 1 billion for every presidential campaign since I don't remember, it was like Obama, one of his election years. But um I also think that that unfortunate fact kind of really allows a lot of corrupting influence in our politics, especially in regards to money and who gets it, how much, who gives it out. Like maybe an oil company will drop $1 million check in some senator's bank account right before he votes on something, and that might influence the way he votes. So I do think it's generally a pretty negative force in democracy and uh, a corrupting force, but I think that kind of applies to money in general.
I agree. I think dark money specifically, like I know it talked about I guess just what is it, like being an unknown donations and stuff like that. You're not wanting to be exposed, and you're just kind of,
Yeah, not disclosed. Yeah.
I feel like that type of thing is just, it makes politics extra, I don't know,
Yeah.
unethical in some way.
Unethical. That's a good word for it.
Yeah, I think it's such a complicated issue that I don't fully stand all the parts of, because when we start talking like lobbying and super PACs and everything, that's why I'm kind of like, ugh,
Yeah.
tune out.
And also with money, I think at the very least, there should definitely be some sort of law that it exposes, I guess it's a aggressive word, but like shows who donations are coming from. So there can't be like dark money where it's like you don't know where this, 500 million came from, or like who was influencing this particular politician. I definitely think there should be a lot more transparency in that aspect, at least if we're not gonna do anything about limiting it, I might as well try and see where it comes from.
Yeah, I agree. I don't even know. I mean, I know we like run over the court case and everything that made that a thing, but I don't agree with it. I don't know why anyone thinks that people should be able to just not have to disclose where they're getting their campaign finances from. But
The Citizens United campaign.
yeah,
Yeah, I remember about that. I think that was the law that allowed all these like dark money super PACs to exist and like donate billions instead of whatever
yeah.
limit was before.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. It's 5:29. I feel like
Now it's 5:30.
5:30. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Is there
Good
like
job,
an outro or
everyone.
do we just
I don't think so.
Everyone had good
okay.
points. I think
Yes,
I agree. I
you
agree.
Job,
persevered.
guys.
I can't believe I sat in a chair for 90 minutes
um,
staring at my
great.
so I mean I can, I literally do it every day, but
Well,
all right. Well, see
have
y'all.
a good spring
Bye.
break.
Have a good spring
Yes.
break.
Yes. Good luck,
Bye.
guys.
Luck.